Okay. Thanks, everyone. Welcome, everyone, to this Experts at Work webinar. So this is on negotiation core principles. And if I could ask you just to mute if you haven't muted already, that would be much appreciated. Thank you very much. This session is for members of all three of our networks. We're recording this session, as you know. Excuse me, sorry about the background noise there. And a big welcome to Ryan Gray. So Ryan is an associate partner with the GAP Partnership, and we're doing this session specifically after recommendations from People Director Partnership members. So big thanks to them. It's on the WhatsApp group. We were talking about negotiation, and the GAP Partnership came up a lot. Hence the invitation. Ryan, thank you again for doing this. Ryan's going to be sharing some ideas and techniques for the first 40 minutes or so, something like that, including some polls and word clouds we've got going on. And we'll have some time for questions and suggestions from the group towards the end. There's no breakout rooms for this one, with a hard finish at 11 o'clock latest. So do send us questions and suggestions via the chat throughout. We'll send Ryan's slides and the recording around later, of course. Thanks again for putting yourself on mute. And Ryan, over to you. Feel free to get the deck up.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all very well. Looking forward to spending some time with you this morning, talking you through negotiation. As Richard said, my name is Ryan Gray. I'm an associate partner in the GAP Partnership. I support some of the world's most recognisable brands, build and execute negotiation strategies, be that in an employer relations setting, sales or procurement. Do feel free to add me up on LinkedIn if you so wish. And as Richard said, please, any questions that you have that spring to mind about the content or negotiation in general, put them in the chat and I'll start working through those once I've got through these slides, as well as inviting you to unmute and ask any questions you've got as well at the end. This is what we're going to cover today. I'm going to give you a definition of negotiation. In fact, we're going to give you a couple. We talk about the basics, talk about what negotiation is, how it might be different from selling, and the critical skills that you need. I'm going to introduce you, or maybe reintroduce some of you, to the most important negotiation tool you'll ever receive. And the next one there is a bit of a spoiler as to what that tool is. It's understanding the clock face. It's going to be a clock face with different types of negotiation. We're going to talk about the style that you should employ depending on your circumstances, and as mentioned, Q&A at the end. Firstly, I'd like to create a bit of interactivity with you. Could you grab your phone or open up a new web browser and just simply go to www.menti.com. www.menti.com for me, and I'm going to ask you, and there you will find a question. Well, you won't. There you'll be asked to input a code, and at the code I would like you to input at menti.com, menti.com, is the code 61374478. So if you look at the top of the slide here, it's got menti.com, and then put in that code for me, and it's going to ask you what words come to mind when you think about negotiation. So could you please just, it gives you three options. You don't need to do three, you can do 1, 2 or 3, but what words come to your mind when you think about negotiation? Oh, one comment already. Here we go. Stress was the first one. Compromise, interesting. Influencing is very important. I could talk all day about influencing, quite frankly. Uncomfortable, relationships, resolution, absolutely. If you look up the dictionary definition of negotiation, resolution will be in there. Tactical conflict. Conflict always exists within negotiation. That's something that we have to understand, and it's something we have to become comfortable with. Success, opportunity, win-win, creating value for both parties. Wins come in a few times there. We'll talk a little bit about what winning means in negotiation. Opposing, that's something we're going to look at this morning. And what else have we got here? Persuasion, patience. Patience is hugely important in negotiation. I'm very happy to see that. All right, interesting. So there's quite a number of things that you've highlighted for me here as to how you feel about negotiation, what you think about negotiation anyway, and we're going to look at a number of those things. Okay, let's get into it. Right. So, firstly, some definitions for you. There's value distribution. A value distribution negotiation is to take value across a bargaining range, maximizing the total value distribution in a win-lose system. So this is the type of negotiation where we do not have the ability to create new value. This is where we're negotiating over one variable. Typically, that will simply be the price of something or the pay somebody's willing to accept. And there's no other variables that we can include. That means what I win, you lose. What you win, I lose. And then there's value creation negotiation. This is to maximize incremental value in the system through trading across different differentials, which means this is what you said in a word cloud there about win-win. This is about win-win. How we can build value between two parties, not focusing on just the price of something, but the different variables that exist, trade them against each other to create new value. And then, of course, there is conflict resolution to resolve intangible differences in underlying positions through relationship influence strategies to gain alignment. Again, influence was something that came up in that word cloud, and that is to get people to see your way of thinking. Now, there's a saying we have at the Gap Partnership, which is negotiation is the art of letting them have your way. It is the art of letting them have your way. And we're going to talk this morning about some of the ways in which you can achieve that. But put quite simply, negotiation is where the buyer wants to buy, the seller wants to sell, and the terms of the agreement need agreeing. Or in an employee relations scenario, it's simply where the employer wants to employ, the employee wants to be employed, and we need to agree the terms in order to enter into that relationship. Put very simplistically, that's what we need to achieve, terms of the agreement. Now, if you were to, I'm glad that in that word cloud, when you thought about negotiation, you know, it wasn't like, nothing like fight came up like that, or aggression came up. None of those words came up on that word cloud that you did for me, which I'm quite thankful for. But the stereotype of the best negotiator is a lot of confidence, very loud, bang your fists on the table, hard bargaining, they won't move, they always get what they want, essentially the person that you just don't want to come up against. But when it comes to sophisticated negotiation, hopefully most of the negotiations that you undertake, then it looks more like this. Great negotiation is about great collaboration, truly understanding the other party, working with them to achieve an optimum outcome, working together to achieve value for both parties. But too often we go into a negotiation thinking like this. Even in collaborative negotiations, one of the biggest mistakes we see people making is the misconception of adversary. People believe in the adversary. It's the person at the other side of the table. This, of course, leads to natural competitiveness and then a distributive negotiation, a win-lose negotiation. But the realities of negotiation, particularly in this marketplace, where sometimes value is hard to find, the realities of negotiation is this. It's you and them versus the situation, not you versus them. Now, you, of course, need to understand the situation. It would be my expectation that you will understand the situation and the circumstances for this negotiation from your perspective very, very well. But in order to get your counterparty to see negotiation from this way, rather than you versus them, then of course you need to understand the situation from their perspective as well. We need to see things through their eyes. And once we understand that, it is then that we can communicate with them in a way that will allow them to see the value in negotiating with us rather than negotiating against us. So one of the ways in which we can achieve that is understand how the other party feel and understand what is important to the other party. So ask yourself this. Take a moment to consider this question. How do we want the other party to feel after a negotiation? How do we want them to feel once the negotiation is concluded, once you've left the room or they've left the room or the call's over? How do we want them to feel? Well, we've given a lot of thought to this over the years, at the Gap Partnership, and we have come to quite a definitive answer to this question. The way that we want the other party to feel at the end of a negotiation is satisfied. We need them to feel satisfied. Negotiation is a dance that we dance. It is a game that we play in order to provide the other party with satisfaction. If you do not manage to provide your counterparty with satisfaction at the end of the negotiation, then that deal is going to fall through. When they get back home or back to the office, they're going to think about the negotiation that just took place. They're going to think, you know what, I'm dissatisfied. And so they're going to call you up and they're pulling out. So you need to provide the other party with satisfaction, irrespective of the outcome. Regardless of how well you've done, how much value that you've taken for yourself in that negotiation, you still need to provide them with satisfaction. So how do we do that? Well, in order to provide them with satisfaction, first, we need to get inside their head. We need to understand what is important to them. We need to understand what is it that's causing them pressure. We need to understand what their needs are, and we need to understand what their wants are and the difference between their needs and their wants. When you go into a negotiation, consider, do you know their situation? Do you know their, if you're negotiating with a business, what's the business situation there? Or if you're negotiating with a person, an employee, maybe, what's their personal situation? How much do you know about what's going on in their own personal life and why they have come to the table with you at the moment, either to renegotiate the terms of existing contract, maybe they've recently secured a promotion and they're renegotiating their terms, or maybe you're onboarding someone, or of course offboarding someone. Understanding their situation and what is important to them and what is not important to them will be hugely valuable in providing them with satisfaction in order to make sure this deal sticks. Or are you focused on your own objectives? Because undoubtedly, all of you have a lot going on professionally. You've got targets that you want to hit. There's things that motivate you in your role. Maybe you've got a bonus that you want to achieve, a pay rise, lots of things going on professionally in your mind that will be affected by this negotiation.
Yeah, well, I should know.
If you go into the negotiation thinking only about your pressures, about your stresses, about the things going on inside your head, then you are a victim of those things. The skill is to focus on what's going on inside their head. What's driving their decision making? What is important to them? By focusing on what's going on inside their head, then we're free. We are liberated from all of the stuff going on inside our head. So what is it that you need to do in order to gain their agreement in this negotiation? You will not be able to achieve that effectively by focusing only on what's going on inside your head. So do not be a victim of your own pressure. Get inside their head, understand what is important to them and what is not important to them. So what's a good way of getting inside their head? Well, quite simply, ask them questions. There is an art to questioning. Too often people just go into a negotiation asking closed questions. If you're negotiating with an individual or a union, let's say, and you go to the union rep and you say, right, are you prepared to negotiate on a different break allowance and us moving the break timings? The chances that you're going to get a yes to that question are very slim. You're going to get no, because that is a closed question. Are you prepared to negotiate on different break allowance? No, we're not. So you need to think about the different way to ask questions in order to get the answers that best suit you and your objectives. So you might say, how important is break allowance to you and your members? Yeah, it's very important. Okay, I thought you might say that. But if your annual leave was adjusted accordingly, would you consider changes to the break allowance? Well, yeah, if the deal was good, we would consider those changes. Okay, so you're telling me that break allowances are negotiable. Well, yes, they are. Okay, you've now closed off with a closed question due to the probing questions that you've asked beforehand. So as a skilled negotiator, you do need to come up with a questioning strategy ahead of your negotiations, because questioning is an instrument of control. gives you control over the process that you're going through. You need to balance the types of questions. You will have some open questions, some probing questions, and of course, you will use some closed questions as long as they're well planned. Use this funnel technique that you see on this slide as a way to get that information. Be careful not to interrogate them though. They will quickly realise if they're being interrogated, and they will quickly shut down and just stop answering all of your questions. So consider it a two-way process. Of course, allow them to ask you questions as well. But as part of your planning, you do need to consider what questions you might be asked, and consider how you will answer those questions. A very simple way of doing that is, after you've built your own questioning strategy, all the things you're going to ask them, think about how you would answer your own questions should they be asked in this process, and what you would say and what you wouldn't say. And then, of course, there's only one danger with a good questioning strategy going into a negotiation, and that is that you blindly, or I should say deafly, move through that questioning strategy and you don't actually listen to the answers that you're given. So make sure you're actively listening to the information that's given to you, because information is power. And as I'm going to go into in a minute, power is very important in negotiation. Too often in a negotiation, we want to hold information back. We don't want to give information away. And if you find yourself in a hard bargaining, short-term distributive negotiation, then that can be appropriate. But understanding the roles that most of you do, it would be my hope, at least, that most of your negotiations are collaborative, where you have the opportunity to build value. So therefore, you do need to make sure that you're sharing information in order to build trust and to give you the opportunity to build value. Because if you hide, then they will hide. There's something called the law of reciprocity. And if you withhold information, they're going to withhold information. But if you share information, then guess what? They're likely to share information as well. So understand that once you've shared that information now belongs to the negotiation, not you. It may be used in that negotiation by both parties. And they can't collaborate with you if they don't know what you want. And if you don't know what they want, then you can't collaborate with them. There's a line from a film called Jerry Maguire that resonated with me. It's help me to help you. Help me to help you. Tell me what you need. And in many instances, you should be prepared to give them what they need. Now, of course, in those situations, you need to take something of equal or greater value back in return for making those concessions. But why not build long-term, collaborative, sustainable deals with your counterparties that benefit both parties? And if they are unwilling to share information, you need to question how collaborative this negotiation actually is. It might be that despite the fact that you should be collaborating, that you want to collaborate, if the counterparty absolutely refuses to collaborate with you, then you do need to identify the fact that we're in a short-term, hard bargaining negotiation here, and I need to act accordingly and protect my best interests. Right, I want to go into another Menti. So if you can go back to www.menti.com, I'm going to take us to the next one. It's the same code. You shouldn't have to put it in if you've already done it. If you've joined us subsequently, please go to www.menti.com, as you can see at the screen here, and if you could use that code and then put in what word best describes your negotiation style. Collaboration coming out well already, which is nice to see. Direct, highly appropriate to be direct, as is flexible. Open as well is appropriate, but not in always all of the time in every negotiation, but certainly in collaborative ones, it will lead you to value. Relationship based, which is what I'd hope for in many of the roles that I see that you do. Listening is hugely important. I've already talked about it, and I will talk about it more actually in this session. Kind, it's important to be very empathetic in your negotiations. Absolutely. Kindness is going to lead you to long-term sustainable deals, but make sure that the circumstances around you employing your kindness are appropriate for the type of negotiation that you have. Outcome focused. Too often, I will meet with a client and I'll ask them what their objective is. And quite often their objective is, well, I just don't want to agree with the thing they're asking for. And if you ever have to deal with trade unions, quite often that will be the answer that you get. You know, when what is it that you want? Well, not what you're offering. And too often your counterparty hasn't thought about what they want. Well, encourage them to think about what they want, because if you don't know what they want, how on earth are you going to give it to them? But great, excellent. Thank you very much. Collaborative coming out very strongly there, which was what I hoped for, an assumption that I made about the negotiations you have and the roles that you undertake. But it's not always the case. Here is a negotiation clock face. This is a tool that was developed by the founder of the GAP Partnership, Steve Gates, in the late 90s, and it illustrates 8 different types of negotiation, from bartering and haggling, hard bargaining, all the way through to win-win, joint problem solving, relationship building. These are 8 different types of negotiation that require 8 different approaches, behavioral approaches. Now, sadly, we do not get to choose where these negotiations take place. I'm sure we would all choose to be at 10, 11 o'clock if that was possible, but we don't choose. It is the circumstances that will dictate where we are on this clock face. So the circumstances we need to consider is the level of interdependency. How much do we need them? How much do they need us? There's the requirement for trust. How much trust is required to make this deal a success? And how long is this relationship going to be? And then, of course, how complex is it? That means how many variables are there? Are we simply negotiating someone's salary or someone's pay or someone's percentage bonus, or have we got a multitude of variables that we can trade in order to generate maximum value? And then there's the power that exists. If one party is all powerful in a negotiation, then maybe you could choose where on the clock face the negotiation happens. But in my experience, I've been working in negotiation for 13 years now. Sadly, rarely, I should say sadly, but rarely, there's never one party that is all powerful in a negotiation. So let's just imagine, 1, 2 o'clock on the clock face, you're in a Moroccan souk and you're bartering over a rug. You want to buy this rug, the person wants to sell the rug to you. The behavior that would be appropriate to get the cheapest rug you could possibly get, which is your single variable in that scenario, is to be hard and firm and tough in your approach to negotiation. Or maybe 4, 5 o'clock, hard bargaining, dealing. Imagine, maybe you're buying a car, you might want a servicing plan on it. Maybe you want a sunroof on there. Maybe you want some mats in the footwells that they could throw in for you. There's some flexibility. So, maybe there is some complexity in the deal, but ultimately the price is the most important thing. If the price of the car isn't right, you're not going to do the deal. The relationship's still a short one. You're going to do this one deal only. Trust is low. You'll probably test drive the car, or maybe get the AA or whomever to check the quality of the car. They're going to credit check you that you can afford it. So the behavior that's appropriate at 4, 5 is still pretty hard and firm and tough in your approach. And then you've got concession trading, win-win. Imagine you work in HR for an organization and you're having to negotiate with a new employee that you're onboarding. There's some interdependency there, because you want this person, you've gone through this whole recruitment process, you do want them to accept the job, and you know what, they've gone through this whole recruitment process and they like the role, they want the job as well. So there's some level of dependency. And the requirement for trust, well, they're going to be working with us, they're going to be working for us, so we need to trust each other. They need to trust us that we're going to give them the support they need to be successful in this role. And the length of the relationship, well, let's hope they're going to be here for a number of years. And I'm planning on being here for a number of years, so there needs to be some longevity here. And the complexity, yeah, of course, we need to make sure that the salary's right, and they need to make sure the salary's right. But what does the holiday allowance look like? What does the flexible working look like? What's the maternity package like? All of the many things that need to be agreed upon in certain contracts that you employ make things a little bit more complex, where in this marketplace particularly, salary isn't the number one driving consideration of everybody. So these are things we need to understand. So if you find yourself at 7, 8 o'clock in session trading win-win, then the behavior that you employ there is not hard and firm and cold. You're going to be open, you're going to be honest, you're going to be warm, you're going to be flexible, you're going to be collaborative in your approach to this negotiation in order to build a more sustainable deal. And then 10, 11 o'clock on the clock face, This is where there is a level of interdependency, where both sides need each other, whereas what is a problem for one is a problem for both, where trust is implicit. You don't talk about what each party is going to need to do. It's implied. These relationships normally span careers, and they're hugely complex, where the price of something is often not discussed because they just trust that the other party is going to charge them what is appropriate for the market. So the behavior that you employ at 10, 11 o'clock is the opposite to the behavior you employ at 2, 3, 4 o'clock. Open, honest, warm, flexible, collaborative. At 10, 11 o'clock on the clock face, you may even consciously make a short-term loss in order to give yourself the best chance of medium to long-term gains. So 8 different types of negotiation that require 8 different approaches. You need to consider the circumstances for which you're negotiating in. But understand that behavior drives behavior, because if you take a competitive position, it will generate a defensive response, and ego will result in protectionism. Ego is an acronym. It stands for extinguishes great opportunities. Do not allow yourself to employ your ego in your negotiations. If you see them employing their ego in a negotiation, understand that that is likely to result in a distributive outcome rather than a collaborative one. So what we need to do is the act of sharing information will build trust. Employ that law of reciprocity that I mentioned before. If you want to receive information, sometimes you must first give information away. So I just want to build on the importance of understanding behavior. At the Gap Partnership, we've identified 14 behaviors of a negotiator. I'm going to talk you through them very quickly now. Behavior number 1, thinks clearly when faced with conflict. Conflict exists in a negotiation. Your objective might be to onboard this person at the lowest salary that makes sense, and their objective will obviously to get the highest salary they can. That's conflicting objectives, so conflict will exist, and you need to get comfortable within the discomfort of that. And then one of the words that came up on our word cloud was kindness, and I think that's related to fairness. And behavior number 2 is do not allow a sense of fairness to influence your behavior. And what I mean by that is your own personal sense of fairness that makes you a good person. If you employ that in negotiation, your counterparty will see that, and there is a high chance that they will choose to use that against you. So by all means, you have a corporate sense of fairness. There'll be certain rules within your organization that stop you from doing unreasonable, unkind and unfair things in the marketplace that you operate in. And by all means, stick to those parameters. But consider the appropriateness of your own personal sense of fairness in a commercial negotiation and the negative impact it might have on the outcome for you and your organization. You do need to look out for the best interest of your business. Number 3, maintain self-control. Uses silence and manages that discomfort. As I said, get comfortable being uncomfortable. Open extreme. So ask for more than you need, offer less than you can afford, and then read their breakpoint. A breakpoint is the absolute cheapest someone will sell something for, the absolute most someone will pay for something. Understand what those numbers are and consider, is hitting their breakpoint appropriate for this type of negotiation, or should I leave some buffer between the deal we do and the absolute most they can afford? Number 6, listen and interpret the meaning behind the words. 7, the most important of these behaviors is planning and preparing. 8 is questioning. We've talked about that. Understand their priorities. And 9 is trading concessions. Don't give anything away for free. Trade these variables. And then 10 is apply those analytical skills to manage the deal. And 11, create the appropriate climate for trust. How much trust do we need? How are we going to create it? And importantly, maintain it in this negotiation. 12, very simply, use an agenda. An agenda is sharing information. And it also gives you control. So it builds trust whilst gives control in a negotiation. Such a widely underutilized tool that I would suggest everybody uses more of. 13, thinks creatively. We're operating in a marketplace where maybe there's not as much value around as there was previously. So let's be creative to both parties in order to build value. And then 14, explores options. What I mean by that is when somebody asks something of you for which typically you just want to say no to, consider under what circumstances you might actually say yes to the thing they're asking. Now, the things you might need in order to say yes to that might be insurmountable for the deal, but rather than simply say no, consider under what circumstances you could agree. Thinking back to our clock face, behaviours 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, these are more hard bargaining behaviours that you'll find on the right side of the clock face. Behaviours 9 through 14, These are more collaborative behaviours you'll find on our collaborative left-hand side of the clock face. Behaviours 6, 7, 8, listening, planning and questioning, well, these are universal. Regardless of where you are on the clock face, these behaviours are appropriate. So what does it look like when we're distributing value on the right-hand side? Price is typically the most important variable, or salary maybe. It could be tough, it could be cold, and there's normally not much dependency on each party. It's not going to be a long-term deal, and it's win-lose. We don't have the ability at this point to build value. The variables simply don't exist, or our counterparty is simply not prepared to work with us. They just want to work against us. So this can still be done with a smile on your face. You know, there's many industries where they distribute value very politely. And something that I want you to think about upon leaving this webinar that we're doing now, when you think about your collaborative relationships, with the ones you perceive to be collaborative, is it collaborative because we're very polite to each other and no one shouts at each other and you know, no one's rude? Or is it collaborative because we're working with each other to build the maximum amount of value possible? Because in my experience, too often people think they're having a collaborative relationship, but all they're doing is politely distributing the value rather than working with each other to create value. So when we create value, there are other variables, other levers. And it might be that if you're not creating value, that you need to work with your counterparty to understand what they are and understand how each party values them. I'd expect that you know what something costs you, what you know what something is worth to you. Well, let's try and understand how the other party values those things as well. You know, when we're creating value, the money, the salary, the price becomes less important because there are other levers we can pull, more value we can create. The relationship is warm, trust is important, and both parties will benefit from the deal. And when we reach those 10, 11 o'clock negotiations, we're not going soft. In a negotiation, we never go soft. We are always firm on the issues, but of course we'll be warm on the people. There will still be conflict at this point in our clock face. There's still problems that need to be solved. And we're not suddenly giving them everything that they want. We will trade away the things that they want for something of equal or greater value. We're building value, not distributing it. It means we need to get things back for the things that we concede. And we need to still provide satisfaction. How do we do that? In fact, providing satisfaction at this point on the clock face, where there are so many other variables to trade, can be a much harder thing to achieve than when we're on the right-hand side of the clock face. And providing them with satisfaction simply means making things hard for them to obtain. And also know that one style is not the answer. I think you will hope and you will try to make sure you're always negotiating in a collaborative way to build value, but you need to identify the moments where there's no value to be had here, or whether the counterparty is not prepared to create value or negotiate with us. So we may need to protect ourselves in those circumstances, and we may need to employ behaviours on the right-hand side of the clock face to prevent us and our organisation from being exploited. It's not a reflection of your integrity if you adopt behaviours that protect you in a negotiation in the face of someone who wants to try and take money or value away from you. Now, before we finish, I just want to touch on the most important part of negotiation, and that is preparation. It's the most important element. Too often what I see in negotiation is people don't take time to prepare for their negotiation. They have a very short prep time. They go into it using their instincts, and what that results is a long and complex negotiation phase, and the time you have to implement it is short, which means you're never going to create maximum value by doing that. What we try and achieve when we work with our clients is spend more time on the preparation phase, more time planning what's going to happen, understand the other party, precondition the other party with messages around what they should expect from the negotiation that we're going to undertake, manage their expectations. And then what you'll find is a much shorter negotiation phase. You'll get to deals much quicker, which, if you so wish, gives you more time to implement those deals and those agreements to make them more beneficial to both parties. Now, as part of your planning, you need to understand what the balance of power is. You cannot build a solid negotiation strategy without first understanding where the power lies in a negotiation. So, as part of your planning for your next negotiations, I want you to consider what this balance of power is. And the things you need to think about is the level of dependency. How much do we need them? How much do they need us? You'll notice an acronym here, BATNA. BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. This is the thing that you are going to do instead of doing a deal with them. This is a thing that they are going to do instead of doing a deal with you. So typically the party with the better alternative will have significant power in this negotiation. But I need you to understand the circumstances. I need you to make sure you've asked questions. I need to make sure you're not inside your own head when you're considering the BATNA. Because if you've gone through a lengthy recruitment process to find the perfect candidate for a role, you might retreat inside your own head and think, right, well, my BATNA is back to square one and start this recruitment process again, or go for employ the person who's not quite right for the position. That's a rubbish BATNA. Their BATNA is simply to stay in their job that they're currently in. That's fine. So you might retreat inside your own head and think their alternative is much better than your alternative. And maybe that is true, but maybe it's not. Maybe ask yourself, why on earth has this person gone through this lengthy recruitment process? You know, if this person remains in their own job, they're likely to be highly demotivated, having to stay in a job that clearly they don't want anymore, which is going to result in them going through another recruitment process and going for another job that they will like less than this one. And our alternative may be we have to go through this process again, but we know we're not going to invest in the wrong person and not going to waste time and money on someone that doesn't want the job. So we might end up with someone better. Look, I don't know if that's the realities of your processes, but these are the questions I want you to ask yourself before retreating inside your own head and giving power away because you overestimate the other side's alternatives. Understand the power of the brand that you have in your marketplace and look at history and precedents. Are they helping you? And if they're helping you, then lean on them. If they're not helping you, then move past them. Understand the market conditions for which this negotiation is taking place. You know, whether you're negotiating with a supplier, with a customer, or with a current or potential employee, you need to be acutely aware of how the market is moving and what that does to your balance of power. You know, the nature of the service or product that you're negotiating around, what impact that has, and what time pressure exists. Because time has a massive influence on power. So what time pressures exist, and are they genuine ones? You know, or are they just arbitrary time pressures that someone's putting on you to try and take power away from you? Consider the circumstances always, yours and theirs, and what are the relationships that exist between you and them in this negotiation, and how can we use it to our benefit? It's important to understand that in a negotiation, you do not need to be liked. You just need to be respected. Too often people worry too much about the other party liking them and they end up paying for it. Don't get me wrong, it helps if they like you, but make sure you're not paying for them to like you in a negotiation. So make sure we're listening to what's being said in a negotiation. We say at the Gap Partnership that negotiation is silence, negotiation is listening. So are you actively listening to what they say? Think carefully about what it is you're hearing. What do they really mean when they're saying it? Are they using soft language? What's their non-verbal communication? You know, is their words saying one thing, but the tone of their voice and their body language saying something totally different? This is what we mean by actively listening. And if you do that, you'll better understand their needs and motivations. You'll identify ways in which you can work together and build value, and you'll know those areas that we should just leave well alone. Negotiation is an important skill. Listening is an important skill in negotiation, which you can develop. There's a quote from the film Fight Club here. Remember, listen to what they're saying. Don't just wait for your turn to speak. Now, lastly, when it comes to planning a negotiation, there's different things to consider depending on the type of negotiation you're undertaking. When you're negotiating on the right-hand side of the clock face, or if you're just negotiating over one variable, things you need to think about are, what is your break point? Okay, so your break point, remember, is the absolute most you're willing to pay someone. Their break point might be the absolute least they're willing to accept as a salary. Between your break point and theirs will be the bargaining range. This is the area where the deal is going to be done. And in a hard bargaining, short-term distributive negotiation, you want to get as much of that bargaining range as you possibly can. Now, how do we do that? How do we get as much of that bargaining range in a short-term distributive negotiation? Well, we open extreme. Remember, behavior number 4 of our 14 behaviors: ask for more than you need, offer less than you can afford. We open extreme. Now, we open extreme for 3 reasons. 1, we want to shift their expectations. Because in this scenario, our seller, whoever they are, they want to get a deal for 12. They want to do a deal on your break point. They want to get as much as they possibly can. But then from your position, as you've opened at 5, being the buyer in this scenario, you've shifted their expectations away from 12 and much closer to their own break point of 10. So opening extreme shifts their expectations. Secondly, by opening extreme, we'll better get inside their head, because when you open at 5, that's going to elicit a reaction from them. And we'll never likely know their break point. But by opening extreme, we'll see their reaction and start getting inside their head. And lastly, we open extreme so we can concede. We don't open extreme in order to get that amount. We open extreme so we can concede from that position. Remember, we need to provide the other party with satisfaction. Well, this is how we provide them with satisfaction: by opening extreme and then conceding. So that's a hard bargaining negotiation. Most of your negotiations, I hope, are collaborative. So we need to understand where value exists. Now, everybody values a pound coin in the same way. For you and for them, you're going to value a pound coin, and it's going to create conflict when you're talking about money. But if most of your negotiations are collaborative, then there should be other variables available to you. So you need to identify the variables that are low cost to you and high value to them. You need to identify the variables that are high value to you and low cost to them. There will be plenty of variables that exist between you and your counterparty for which you value them differently. In fact, the only variable that you will value in the same way is money. So every other variable will be valued differently by both you and them, which will give you plenty of opportunities to trade those variables against each other in order to get the key variable or the conflict variable where you want it to be. So you need to plan how are you going to use those variables in order to create long-term, sustainable, collaborative relationships in your negotiations. So in summary, think from your counterparty's position. Have the mental agility to be flexible and understand the different types of negotiation you're undertaking. Know what these 14 behaviors are and use them to your benefit. Understand what your strengths and weaknesses are. Know that there's lots of different styles of negotiation, and one style is not the answer. Be adaptable. It's unlikely that all of your relationships are collaborative. So you need to accept that, and you need to identify those negotiations which collaboration isn't possible, and then you need to protect yourself in those negotiations. Remember that clock face refers to the individual negotiation, not the relationship. So you might have a hugely collaborative relationship with a counterparty, but something happens, something occurs where you now need to have a hard bargaining distributive negotiation with them over one thing, and you need to plan accordingly. The more you plan, the more efficient you will be and the more time you have. Planning is 90% of negotiation. And you build value by trading those low cost, high value variables. You can attach conditions to it. You can still make things hard to obtain, even in collaborative negotiations. Right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen there and see if anybody has any questions for me. How are we looking, Richard?
Yeah, very good. Thanks for such. That was incredibly thorough. Loads of useful techniques. I found that really useful. I love this quote about negotiation is the art of letting them have your way. The clock face was really useful as well, and the relevant psychology is really, really useful, I found. So do let us have questions in the chat. We'll hope to get to them. We've got 3 already. So Sissy says, is there a technique to work your way out of an interrogation if you've mistakenly gotten yourself to, as it were, the wrong point? So Sissy was asking that just when you were talking about closed questions. Don't go into closed questions going with open. But what if you've slipped up, as we do?
Is that you're interrogating them or you're being interrogated? Do we
I think it was going on. Good question. Sissy, would you be able to come on screen? Is that all right? But I'm just going to remind people we are recording. But sorry, yeah.
No problem. So the question was if you're asking them the questions.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. I thought that would be it, because we can easily get caught in that trap. We've got a good questioning strategy. We're moving through it. They're answering. We're getting information. but it's important that they do understand certain things from our perspective as well. So what I would do as part of my planning would be information that I want them to have. There's going to be certain elements of this deal that you want them to know. And if you're halfway through your questioning strategy and you've not shared any of that information, quite simply, I would pause and say, have you got any questions for me? And they might say no, and you can still interrogate them and go, well, do you want to know anything about this? Do you want to know anything about this? Do you want to know anything about the culture of our business? Do you want to know anything about progression in our business? Do you want to and I would ask the questions you want to be asked yourself. There is very famous quote from Margaret Thatcher. It wasn't a quote, she was being interviewed, and it was a young journalist interviewing her, and she didn't want to answer the question that she had been asked, so she asked her own question and then answered it. She said, young man, that's not the question you should have been asking me. You should have asked this question. And then she went on to answer it. So invite them to ask questions. And if they don't ask the questions you want them to ask them yourself and answer them. Would be what I would do there. Hazel, it's the law of reciprocity. Reciprocity. If you want to get something first, you need to give something. And that, to your point as well, Sissy, is, answer some questions in order to make sure they keep answering yours. Oh yeah, Richard,
Brian,
you stuck that in there. Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, yeah, you pronounced it beautifully there. I would have struggled. So that word, there's one that could be sensitive, and I'm going to leave the question to come in if she wants, but it's a great question. So salary negotiations is an example. How do you advise we approach it when we have a fixed budget and no room to move, even if you wanted to? That's a great question for this group, because it's not unheard of.
Yeah. Yeah, Ruth, that's what's hugely important there is the preconditioning that you do through the process. So this is the information that you share before the negotiation begins, the things that you're saying to them. You need to make sure that they go into that negotiation with you with an understanding their salary band exists, that there is a hard and fast red line on that salary band. You may choose to share with them depending on where their salary currently sits and what that red line is, or you may feel that that's too much information to share. And so you need to consider the information you share with them before the negotiation starts. Now, if they ignore that, that is to their credit, and they're going extreme and they're getting as much as they can. But if your preconditioning has worked well, then they will quickly concede from that position. And even if you want to move, again, this is fairness that I talked about. I imagine all of you want to pay everyone as much as you can, because that's what I would want to do in your situation. But we need to protect our business. We need to make sure our business is sustainable for these employees, because if we paid everything they wanted, our business would fail. And what we want to provide them with is long-term sustainable employment for as long as they want it and we need it. And the way in which we do that is to work within these bands that are commercially sensible for us. And so we need to condition our employees that these bands exist, not because we don't want them to have as much as they can, but because we want them to be employed for as long as they can be. And for us to work within these parameters gives us that ability. So that's sort of some of the preconditioning I would do.
What if they're not convinced by that argument, Ryan? So for instance, say, I don't know, you're in a company and everyone knows they're doing quite well, but actually perhaps the management team are thinking, we've got to tighten the hatches, batten down the hatches because of prevailing economic conditions. See what I mean? That sort of thing.
All you can do is because I've been involved in a lot of trade union negotiations, and it's their modus operandi to reject all of that preconditioning, and they know they're very good at doing it, and they're very, very good at doing their own preconditioning as well. So some of the things that you can do when you find yourself in that situation and your preconditioning hasn't worked is we do still need to provide them with satisfaction. And the way in which we can provide them with satisfaction is by making concessions from our opening position. So if you know that you're going to have to go into a trade union negotiation or negotiate with somebody who behaves like someone that's in a trade union, then we might consider opening extreme. We might consider offering them very little in the first instance, and then conceding from that position. Now, we're only ever going to concede down to our red line. We can't pay them more than what that red line. So we open extreme, and then we make very deliberate, very planned concessions, and each of those concessions comes with its own preconditioning. So that first concession is when they reject your first pay offer, You're like, oh, okay, well, that's a shame. You know, we really want to keep working with you, so let me see what I can do. Let me go back internally and speak to the powers that be and see what I can get. You're making things hard to obtain. It might be that you've got the whole thing signed off right to that red line, but you might need to give the impression that you're working hard on their behalf to get them more from the business. And then you go back, and you're not going to go back and make a concession until you have planned to do so. So if you start negotiations on the 1st of February, you really want to get this deal done on the 28th of February, your first concession might come on the 10th of February, then you'll make another one on the 15th of February, then the 19th of February, then you're going to make one on the 23rd of February, and the last concession you're going to make is going to be on midnight on the 28th, where you will go to that red line. That's everything you can do, because if you do your preconditioning, you plan and prepare your concessions, you attribute a lot of work to every concession that you make. In my experience, that deal gets done on the 15th or the 19th of February, because already they feel like they're getting as much as they can from you. And the discomfort has got to the point for them now where they just want to get it done. And if you get to midnight on the 28th of February and you've reached your red line, then we know where we are. There might not be a deal to be had here, because I cannot give you any more money and they will not accept what's been offered. So we need to consider the realities of the commercial situation we find ourselves in.
That's really helpful detail. Thanks, Ryan. I just wanted to turn to Rupert next. Rupert, could I ask you to, because your question felt quite nuanced to me, so could I ask you just to throw it into the pot, as they say?
Yeah, thanks, Richard. Thanks, Brian. This has been super helpful. So often in the HR world, we like to tie variables down in the offer due to policy or on the grounds of consistency. I wonder whether we make a rod for our own back sometimes when we do that, because the only variable we leave on the table then usually is salary. But there's also a price to be paid when you make a concession and you vary something that, you know, has always been unvariable, if you know what I mean.
No, exactly what you mean.
Yeah, is this a typical sort of HR trap, or what's your view on it?
Yeah, it is, because if you suddenly start trading salary against annual leave, and no one in the business has more than 25 days annual leave, apart from this one person who has 28 days annual leave due to the salary negotiation that you've got, you might now have 4,000 people asking for 3 days extra annual leave. So that is problematic. And so if that is the reality and all that you can trade upon is salary, then you are having a hard bargaining negotiation, and you need to understand the realities of that, and you need to plan accordingly, which means that you might have to do that preconditioning we talked about. You might need to open extreme and move in the ways that we talked about. And because this is the challenge with the role that you do, is that it should be 11 o'clock, joint problem solving, relationship building, long term, because you work for the same organization. It should be the most collaborative negotiation possible. But sadly, the realities of it, if you only can negotiate on their increase in bonus percentage, on their salary, then you do need to make sure that you are protecting yourself and, of course, your organization in the face of those negotiations. But in answer to your question, are we creating a rod for our own back by nailing down those other variables? Yes, you are. What you're doing is isolating a variable. And when you isolate a variable, the salary, then you're moving yourself to 3 o'clock on the clock face. If you do have the ability, if your organization isn't so vast that offering a couple of extra days annual leave or allowing them to work from home on Fridays or whatever it might be allows you to generate more value, then you should explore those options if it's possible, because it'd be value additive. It will be creating value. The deals will be more sustainable, and there'll be more win-win. So if it is possible, then I would explore it. If opening up the bonus or the annual leave or the flexible working is going to create a mutiny, then you might need to just prepare for a hard bargaining negotiation.
Thanks.
Ryan, thank you ever so much. That was, I can't believe you got through so much substance and detail that was so helpful in such a relatively short space of time. I really appreciate it. Thank you ever so much to everyone for coming. Do please leave us some feedback. We're going to send Ryan's slides around and the recording, and I'll also include his contact details for people who would like to get in touch. Excellent to see you. Really interesting conversation. Ryan, thank you ever so much again.
You're very welcome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for your questions.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone.
Do stay on, Ryan, so you can see the feedback.
Okay, we'll do.